Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forester's Forecast. My guest today is Dr. Steve Knowe. I've known Dr. Knowe for a little over a decade, and for about that amount of time, he's led a successful one-man consulting business in forest biostatistics and has just been the inspiration for anybody that may want to branch out and do this on their own. I've also been enjoying his recent LinkedIn post where he's providing Shiny apps to essentially get into FIA biomass data state by state. You can check him out at his website at steveknowe.com. So please help me welcome Dr. Steve Knowe. Hey, Steve. It's very excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Mickey, thanks for having me.
So it's been a little bit since I've seen you or talked to you, but I have to say I'm very impressed because you're one of the few people I know that has successfully had their own biometrics consulting business.
Oh, well, I think there's some other ones that have had that, like Forest Tech is another big one. But anyway, yeah, it's kind of nice to think about that and the time that I've spent working by myself and doing projects more that I can pick and choose from. It's been
Mhm.
really nice to be able to do that. So,
Yeah, and you're what, 11 years into having your own consulting business. That's really exciting.
time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk to you on the podcast because I've been seeing some of the work you're putting out on LinkedIn. And,
Mhm.
the last time we talked in 2016 or so, you were saying, oh, you're a SQL and .NET,
Right?
programmer, and now you're doing R and Shiny, and it's so exciting to see that.
Yeah, well, I gave uh, the VB.net and the ASP.net a try,
Mhm.
and it was just more than I could handle. It was I'm not really a programmer, and I didn't want to spend all my time learning how to install programs on the cloud so that other people can run them. But that's where it got to be. There was so much maintenance overhead with it that it just got to be where it wasn't ASP wasn't a viable alternative. And then I actually saw something on LinkedIn that inspired me. It was a little meme that said, "Be brave enough to suck at something new." And so I said, "Well, I'm going to try to suck at Shiny."
Yeah.
And so I started picking it up, and I went back to some of my old research that I did back when I was just a young scientist, and some data that I'd collected and some small studies, and started dabbling around with it, and found out that it was really pretty easy to use, and it doesn't take a whole lot of expertise to uh, install a program. You just hit the install, and everything. If your program's set up right,
Yeah.
everything goes well. So
Yeah.
much easier to use than ASP, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm also not a programmer. I don't have much experience outside of R and Shiny and, the
Mm,
little bit of HTML that I need to know to do Shiny. But
right.
I can imagine it could be quite a headache to keep up with everything. And it's like every year is like a new software to learn. And it's just, man, it
Mhm.
sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with. But R has been a very useful tool, and Shiny really opens a lot of doors to people using it. So
You know, And I like how you said that if I'm going to suck at something new, I'm going to suck at Shiny. It's
yeah,
interesting because, it doesn't take a whole lot of work to make a Shiny app. They've
no, it
made it
doesn't.
so easy to use. And
Hmm.
I developed a few myself for my forest managers, and
Hmm.
they love it and they're impressed. And I'm like, guys, that's not the impressive thing. I've got 8 hours into that Shiny app. It's the 300 hours I have in the growth and yield models behind it that's impressive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's
um,
just what they see as the application. So
right,
but
exactly.
that's important too. So
Yeah.
otherwise, it's just a black box of equations that sits there on your computer, and no one has the benefit of having that information.
Right,
So,
exactly. Well, and that's the reason that I designed it. We had some pretty outdated GUIs that people were using, and then
mm,
it got to the point where they weren't even being able to install on Windows 10 computers.
wow.
So I finally said, like, well, I have all of this in an R, script. Why don't I just make a Shiny app to connect to
Mm,
that? Then you all can use it. And yeah, and that's how it came about. And now they love it. It's like, oh, that's great. We don't have to call the biometrician just to
yeah,
put some yield tables out there.
yeah. Well, I find it pretty handy to use, to have those tools available, programming tools. I guess the other thing I use is VB.net, and that's kind of an old holdover from my days back as an undergraduate student when I learned how to program uh, in true basic on a HP mini computer.
Wow.
And so it's kind of I've kind of carried that through the years and kind of built on that through Quick Basic, which was kind of one of the early Windows based versions. And now they've got a full version that lets you install on pretty much any platform you want to.
Mhm.
And so I'm still building Windows apps with that. So I have
Yeah, very cool.
some planning software.
I'm also curious why. So you had the choice. You could do R, or you could do Python, but you chose R.
Uh, I was more familiar with R at the time, and yeah, I've got up here on my bookshelf. I've got a Python book, but that's as far as it's gotten. Is just up on the bookshelf, and
Mhm.
it was just kind of a choice of convenience, really, more than anything else. So
Yeah.
I think there are a few forestry apps that are written in Python that I'm aware of. So,
Yeah, I also just probably same as you. I had a little bit of experience in R, and then
mm,
whenever I went to Virginia Tech, everybody was using R, so it was just
mm,
naturally the one I got into. And most people use Python in a
mm,
GIS class at some point in
uh,
time, but back then it wasn't as popular for statistical work.
mm,
So I just jumped into R. But these days, I wish I used Python more because as you get more and more into working with spatial applications, it's like
mm,
the connection of Python to like QGIS
mm,
really make understanding that language a lot more helpful.
yeah, yeah.
I just I don't know about you, but I just don't have time to keep learning new languages. There's
No.
just
Well, maybe when you get to be semi-retired, you can do these passion projects and you can pick it up then. So,
right,
but
right.
I started back in the SAS days, and I don't know if you ever knew Glenn Glover he was at Auburn University at the time, but I think he got his PhD at Virginia Tech. Um, he sent me. I worked for him as a undergraduate student, making $2 an hour, and he wrote out a program that called up a file from disk and sorted it and printed out the means. And so I was used to running Fortran programs where you'd have read in 20 cards and five of them would have errors. It would take you 2 days to debug it just to get it to run through. But anyway, this program that Glenn had me run, it ran the first time and produced a 1 inch thick output, and I was just really impressed by that. And that was kind of how I got started in kind of interested in computers and maybe even kind of research in general. Doing some of that was on a fertilization project that I was working on then. So it's kind of interesting how things kind of evolved over time. You get something starts early in your career, a seed gets planted early in your career, and if it gets nurtured, it can grow into something, into a whole career.
Yeah, yeah. I came at it from a different path because I was a young, hungry undergrad who needed work, and
Mm-hmm.
Dean Coble had a position open to work in his research team, collecting field data. So I
Mm-hmm.
went out with him every summer as an undergrad collecting trees. And so my idea of biometricians is, well, if they're professors, they stay in the office, except summers they go in the field. And then, but if you're a working biometrician, you spend all your time outside. Yeah, no, you don't.
Yeah.
I had a very different view of what my life would be than what it actually became.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed all of that time out in the field, sweating,
Mhm.
100+ degree weather in East
Oh
Texas,
yeah.
and it was worth it. At least building the foundation to understand why collecting data is important.
Right. And kind of related to that, yeah, I wanted to make a plug for people creating these data banks where all the data that is collected for the research over the years is collected in a somewhat standard format and
Mm-hmm.
put there to where people in the future can go back and look at it and say, oh, I have an idea how we can look at how we can use this data.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the beneficiary of that at Oregon State. And there was, and all the professors that I asked, can I use your data? I was never denied. Can I use your data to write this publication? And they always said yes. They were happy to get a publication that they didn't really have to do much on. So,
Right.
other than provide the data. And so it, uh, and it was really good for a young scientist to come in to that kind of a situation. So,
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage everyone to, in a research organization, to standardize your data collection.
Yeah, so I agree. It's very important to have a standardization on your data. I remember seeing those guys at Virginia Tech who were putting all
Mm,
of that biomass data together that they use for, fitting the new biomass equations, which I think
mhm.
now I don't know if they're implemented in FIA. I've seen you might know more than I do, but I've seen some of that coming out. Some of the results showing like higher branch and needle
Hmm.
biomass than what was predicted from the old equations. So,
Oh, hmm.
um,
Hmm.
but I remember they were putting those biomass data together and they were collecting data from everywhere. I mean, it was like on
Yeah.
every possible media you imagine,
Hmm.
old like big like reels of tape and like
Wow.
it
Hmm.
was really interesting to see what they had to jump through to put those data together. And biomass data, it's not some crazy amount of data. It's fairly simple, but again, if you don't put it in the same, standardized format, it's going to be very difficult to
Be
put a big
trouble to
data
put it
set
together. Yeah.
together.
Yeah. That's the same in most studies. So you get a
Yeah.
lot of people involved in it, and I guess the research co-ops are a good example of kind of a continued standardized data collection format, and it it makes it to where they can use the same information and connect the dots,
Right.
literally and figuratively. So,
Another one that I wanted to mention, kind of related, is I don't know if you've seen my previous podcast with Carl Vigren. He's a Swedish, he's a forestry student
yeah.
in
Mm-hmm.
Sweden, PhD forestry student.
Mm-hmm.
And he has an R package that he put together where he's standardizing growth and yield models.
Oh.
So he's
Hmm.
trying to put them all in the same format and have good documentation.
Hmm.
He's going back to the literature and really
Wow.
digging into the details. And it's man, it's very impressive what he's done so far.
That's a
Um, yeah,
pretty big project.
yeah.
Ambitious.
Yeah, and if
Mm.
you look on top of all the other stuff he's doing for his PhD, this isn't even one of them. He's just kind of doing this
Mm.
for fun, and
Mm.
wow, pretty impressive. Uh,
Yeah.
his GitHub page is called Forester. So if
Hmm.
you just
Okay. I'll go
Google
check that
Forester,
out.
you can find him. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Um,
is a real ambitious project. I think it would be interesting just to see all the equations in one set of measurement standards, in
mm,
metric units or imperial units. That would be a big help.
right. Exactly.
So,
Um, Well, cool. So, well, I kind of have a little bit of a standardized question that I have to ask because I'm always curious. And I recently found out I did not know that you went to undergrad and master's at Auburn. So,
okay,
this is why I do this. So, I'm
okay.
really curious about why you got into forestry. Like, what started it all for you? What made you decide to, go to Auburn and do forest management?
That's a good question. I wasn't going to be a forester. I was
Mhm.
going to be an astronaut. And I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where the Saturn V booster was developed. And I can remember when I was 10 years old when they first started testing that, uh, and just feeling the whole earth shake. And as they were testing it for first 1 second, and then eventually they got to where they had a 3 minute burn to where the at full throttle to where the dishes in our cabinets were rattling around. And as a young man, that kind of impressed me. So I was going to be an astronaut. And somewhere along the line, I figured out that astronauts had to know a lot of math. And I wasn't very good at math, and at least I didn't think I was. And looking back on it now, I think I just had a problem going from the concrete concepts of arithmetic, 1 + 1 = 2, to the abstraction of algebra, where you put letters in there instead of numbers. And that didn't click for a long time for me. So I kind of shied away from that. And my father had a car dealership, and a sawmill owner from Tennessee came and paid cash for a Porsche.
Mm-hmm.
And so I heard about that from my father. That kind of got me interested, and hadn't really thought of forestry as a profession. And I'd always grown up, running around in the woods around my house, and playing in the woods and playing on the hills, and was able to kind of connect the dots there and say, well, this is something that I feel like I could be passionate about and good about. And so I went into forestry, not thinking there was much math in it, and was quickly shown otherwise. So it was kind of a quick awakening. But so I grew up in Alabama, and the natural place for me to go to school was Auburn for undergraduate in forestry. And so I ended up there, and uh, went to summer camp. Before I went to summer camp, I worked with David South, sat out a quarter before summer camp so I could earn some money to be in school during summer instead of working. And so I worked with David South in the nursery co-op, traveling around to all the forest nurseries in the southeast, putting in herbicide plots. And so that was kind of an interesting connection with my later life, part of the research aspects of it.
Right.
And so when I graduated, most of the jobs that were available at the time were in procurement, and that just didn't sound real interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to go to get a graduate degree, and also at Auburn, and did some work with height age equations using the Southwide Pine seed source study from
Yeah.
way back.
Yeah.
So that was a one of the original permanent plot studies. So it was pretty interesting to have. And again, standardized data collection for the most part, not completely, but mostly.
Mm-hmm.
So and so that's as I finished up my master's degree. The Auburn University Herbicide Co-op was getting started up, and they were collecting data for some of their studies, and they needed a data analyst. And so I kind of fit into that and into that position. And that was the beginning of I guess, my research trajectory, more focused on vegetation management at the time. It was a pretty hot topic at the time, but it seems like it's not so hot anymore because I guess all the answers have been found. But it was a pretty. There were a lot of people involved in that field at the time, and I was interested in trying to find out how much competition, how much hardwood competition was too much in pine plantation, and spent a lot of time trying to answer that question, and kind of hit around that for a long time. I don't know if we've really answered that fully, but we do have some models that'll help us get at those answers.
Yeah. So I can completely. I just recently went to Huntsville for the first time, so I
Hmm.
can completely understand how you would definitely want to be an
Yeah.
astronaut. I'm 38. I went and I wanted to become an astronaut.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
we went to see the where they have the space camp
Oh
and
yeah.
museum and all
Hmm.
of that, and they have the Saturn rocket. They have, I
Right.
guess it's a replica that they have
Hmm.
broken down where you can see everything. So
Yeah.
it was awesome to be there with my kid. We're both looking at a moon rock with
Mhm.
our eyes, like this, going,
Mhm.
"Wow, that's from the moon."
Yeah.
Um, but also, we, my wife was there on training, so me and the kid, we took a bunch of hikes into the national forest
Mhm.
there, and I can completely see how forestry would be
Yeah.
your next go-to because,
Yeah.
man, the forest there is so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to be out there.
The hills around Huntsville are really nice, and
Mhm.
um, I still long to go back to them occasionally.
Yeah.
So,
So what's keeping you in South Carolina?
um, just our house here. We like where we live.
Mhm.
We recently added uh, covered our back porch, and so kind of settling down here for the long haul. And
Yeah.
I think the climate is good for us here for forestry. There's a lot of forestry organizations in the area.
Mhm.
You know, Hancock or Manulife, I'm sorry, is in Charlotte, and some other TMOs, AFMs in the area.
Right.
So uh, I guess Tia Cref has some land around the area. There's actually a lot of, you don't have to go very far away from Charlotte before you start getting into the non-industrial private forest land.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of work to do for a consultant. A lot of timber to cruise back when we were doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of auditing. So I did some of that too. Uh, some programming work for the people around here. They all have planning needs.
Yeah. So I see that you've been working for pretty much all of the big names you've got on your resume: Rainier, Hancock, AFM. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, you've been doing little consulting projects on the side for all of these guys.
I actually was employed by them for a while, and I've done a few little uh, pieces of work here and there. I guess Hancock is one. I did a lot of inventory work for them when I was doing the tree hugging part of it,
Mhm.
inventory workups, and some of the auditing.
So one of the things that you mentioned that I don't have as much experience in, but I've been diving into quite a bit.
Hmm.
And you mentioned it, how much hardwood is too much for
Ah,
pine growth. But you said we have some models. We have some
hmm,
models that include
hmm,
hardwood competition
right.
in forms of basal area or something.
Hmm.
I don't I don't necessarily find the models that we have to be, they're not like super precise, right?
No,
And
no,
the way that we can quantify hardwood, sometimes basal area itself is just not the best metric for hardwood
no,
competition. So
no.
curious, since you've had a long time to think about this, if you've had any thoughts about where we might could go compared to where we are right now.
With the competition assessment,
Yeah.
I think we need to look more at try to think more about the resource usage that we're trying to measure. What are we trying? We're actually trying to partition finite resources on a site between hardwoods and pines. So we want to make sure the most resources go to the pine trees. So how much how much is too much? We really don't know that. And what's the best way to measure that? How are the resources being used? Well, we've got light and water and nutrients, and I think that something related to foliage or area crown size would be a better estimate of competition effects than just simply basal area.
Mhm.
They give the holistic idea of how much hardwood volume or biomass is there sucking up water and nutrients and taking up light and space. So I think something like some sort of a foliage measurement would be good. Um, And I've done a little bit of dabbled a little bit of that with the Douglas fir work in Oregon, looking at different ways of projecting growth, even. And
Mhm.
some of the crown-based methods are actually as good or better than using diameter.
Mhm.
So I was pretty impressed by that. We actually measure the crown area or crown diameter and grow those as a tree list, and then recover the DBH from that after it's been grown.
Okay. That's a pretty interesting approach. It and it seems to be working quite well for biomass
Mhm.
estimation to just have crown measurements. That's why remote
Yeah.
sensing for biomass works so well. It's not really great in my experience though for recovering a diameter distribution,
Mhm.
especially whenever your main concern is not biomass but is actually products, right?
Right.
Which is
Yeah.
where the money's at. So um, what's your experience with that? I mean, did you find it worked well in Douglas fir, or it was just good enough, or
Uh, it worked okay.
yeah?
So it was adequate. Um,
Mm. One of the papers that you published, 1997,
oh,
comparison of diameter distribution prediction, stand table projection, and individual tree growth modeling methods for young red alder plantations.
yes.
That's a topic that's a little bit near and dear to my heart because I work
Yeah.
a bit with stand table projection. But
Right.
you wrote that paper back in what was it? What did I say again? 97. So
Yeah. It's been a while.
I had a few years to think about it since then.
Yeah.
As far as the approaches go, you have different precision amongst the approaches, but you
Mhm.
also have different levels of error. You know, if you're interested in stand level metrics and you're using individual tree models, then you have the most compounding of error, right?
Mhm.
So I'm curious, just over the years, from when you wrote that paper to now, if your opinion on anything has changed.
Whether those approaches are good or not, I
Yeah.
think there's some other approaches that could be used, like some stand table projection methods, some that you've dealt with.
Mm,
So there's some other ways you can do the stand table projection method, and some different ways that you can allocate mortality, which
mm,
I think is one of the big differences in those. The results of those methods is the way that mortality is allocated.
right.
So, uh, but I don't know. I don't. I still think that the some sort of a individual tree approach is would be preferable to just having a diameter distribution approach. So you could ultimately follow individual trees.
Hmm.
And I think that was one of the goals out there, was to be able to follow individual trees. And so the stand table projection method did that, but it still has the nice features of the stand level modeling, where you're fairly confident that the sums of basal area and trees per acre are correct or close. So
Right,
yeah.
exactly. I think that's the key because at the stand level models tend to
Mhm.
predict the best.
Yeah.
But if you have some way to allocate that to your diameter distribution or your tree list, whatever it may
Mhm.
be, I really like stand table projection because you
Mhm.
can do both, right? You can do tree list or if you have things in a stand table. So
Yeah.
the math works out pretty similarly. It doesn't take a lot
Yeah.
for each case. But if you're only doing tree level models and you don't have a detailed tree list, then you have to recover a diameter distribution or predict a diameter distribution.
Well, that's the next best. That's the next best thing, is a diameter distribution,
Yeah.
and it's preferable to having a whole stand model with a product breakdown function,
Mm.
which I still use those a lot in some of the work I do with the product breakdown functions, and they give you a number, but it's not very accurate according to the people that use it. So the total volume is pretty close, but the distribution between products is not so great. And I don't know if it's the break between pulpwood and chip and saw, or the break between chip and saw timber that's causing the problem. So
Mhm. What kind of models are you using there for the product breakdown?
just like the ones the Weibull based
Yeah.
product breakdown functions, like is used in FastLob.
Mhm. Yeah, I was dabbling a bit, and I think it's called Dirichlet regression, something like that.
Hmm.
But it's essentially a way. So it's a way to assign essentially percentages to a category. It's a
Hmm.
category based regression,
Hmm.
and with more it's not just a two category like a binomial yes
Hmm.
and no. It's as many as you want
Hmm.
essentially. And I found that at least within a data set, it fit quite well. But whenever you have overlapping diameter limits on products, it doesn't really work so well.
You can't have overlapping diameter limits, and that you just have to, pretty much almost have to call
Right.
a product tree by tree product, and it's hard to merchandise those through time when you've
Mhm.
got those overlapping diameter limits, because they change. The trees grow through those, and it's just hard to pick and choose which one it is, and
Yeah.
what is it that's going to distinguish when you've got a tree that's in those overlapping diameter limits. How do you distinguish between one product or the other? Is it merchantable length,
Mhm.
or is it some sort of a quality estimate?
Right.
So,
And the quality aspect of it there is the key to making, it's the monkey wrench in the whole thing because
mhm,
it's just so stochastic. It's like you can't really predict it at any individual tree level or even any individual stand level. It's like
yeah,
you either know that that stand had ice damage or it didn't. That's
yeah,
about what you can do. um,
yeah. It's a good good point.
yeah.
So, yeah. So,
So we made it to your master's at Auburn, and then you went to work. What made you decide to go to UGA and get a PhD?
well, after I worked at Auburn, I worked for Crown Zellerback, and as a research forester doing mostly vegetation management research. And the company got taken over, and I was felt really vulnerable, and thought that having a higher degree would give me more options for to stay employed. And so, that's how I ended up at Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And I just pursued a PhD there. And I I think I happened to show up about the time that Barry Shiver was heading off to Kenya for a year-long Fulbright fellowship. And had just started a herbicide research program, and I think I showed up at the right time to kind of pick that up and manage it while he was gone to Kenya for a year. And so I was able to kind of fit into that real quick, and I had data sets pretty much ready to analyze when the time came for my PhD. So
Yeah, that's exciting. So Shiver was your major professor?
right. Mhm. So he was doing some work with different herbicides and looking at vegetation control, see how well they work, but also to see how well the pine trees grew afterward. And so I spent a lot of time on my hands and knees crawling around, measuring ground line diameters of hardwoods and pines, and fighting off briars, and you know the things that graduate students have to do.
Right.
So. Uh, and then one of the things I did with that data was I wanted to simultaneously predict how the growth of one species, for example, sweet gum, affected the growth of not only the pine trees, but also the growth of the red oaks and the growth of the andropogon and the growth of the blackberries. And
Mm.
so I put all these equations together with some drivers and simultaneously predicted the changes in vegetation over time. And so that was one part of my dissertation. And then the other part was looking at diameter distributions of young stands,
Mm.
real young stands up to age 4. And the same procedures that work for the older stands work for the younger stands too.
Mm.
So, and then I also did some diameter distribution work with the older plantations that the PMRC had, where they had hardwood basilaria over time. And so it was a little bit different from the models that were produced at Virginia Tech, but that's what science is about, is finding different ways of doing different answers to the same question. And then it's up to you to decide which one works best for you.
Yeah. I think there's a recent publication. I believe Bronson Bullock is the current director of the PMRC, is the main author on that, where he's comparing different growth and yield models across the South. And I think FastLab and the PMRC models pretty much perform the same. So
They're pretty close.
yeah,
They are pretty close. And yeah, yeah. I've made some comparison of those too, and they're really close. And some people say one of them is. Some people prefer one model over another one for one reason or another, and that's their personal preference, I guess.
I well, I'm biased because Harold Burkhart was my major professor, but
Yeah.
I like the Virginia Tech models because in the PMRC models, if you're doing thinning, you have to model the unthinned counterpart as well, and it's
Right.
just an extra step that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
The ease of use of the Virginia Tech models is pretty much why I like them.
Yeah.
But also, I have a little bit of a Frankenstein. I'm sure most people do that. I don't like, for example, the product models out of the past lab, so I use my own.
Oh.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a few things like that, and then of course, if you're going to do anything with biomass, you gotta, the equations that Dayhigh has produced out of the UGA, out of the
Hmm.
PMRC, are kind of the best that we have for
Yeah.
southern lolly and slash pine plantations. So
Hmm.
if you're going to do biomass, you need to use Dayhigh's equations.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, unless you're doing any kind of carbon project, then I guess you need to just push it all through FES anyways.
Yeah. Well, even just the database, the FIA database has a huge amount of information in there, and they have basically every tree has a breakdown of uh, you know above ground biomass with all the components,
Mhm.
and it's there for every tree over 5 inches of diameter. And um, that's some of the things I've been working on lately. These statewide estimates, shiny models to look at biomass or uh, by species in different states, in different parts of the state. And I developed one for South Carolina and one for Alabama. And the relationships in those, in the data to develop those equations, is just amazing how tight of a relationship those are.
Mhm.
It's the ratios, they're curves. There's no scatter to them. It's just a line, and all you have to do is match an equation to the line.
Mhm.
You basically have that ratio equation. And so I guess it was above ground biomass has a lot of variation around it,
Mhm. Okay.
and so it doesn't have a 1.00 r square like the ratio equations do.
Yeah.
Everything, they have a correction process where they've got a standard equation that they use that's corrected for the diameter of the tree that you're actually measuring, and that's applied to many of the biomass components.
Mhm.
But that's already been done,
Mhm.
and so the data is already corrected. It's just right there, ready to use. And um, so it was I saw that as an example to do what I call one of my passion projects, where I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm doing it just because I want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about programming in R and Shiny, and it's a chance to kind of maybe give back to the community. You know, there's a lot of people out there that could use this information. You know, the little landowner on his 10-acre woodlot wants to know, well, someone's telling me I've got a lot of carbon in these trees. How much is out here? So
Right.
he just wants to have an idea what he has. It doesn't need to be as precise as a carbon verification project,
Mm-hmm.
but he just needs to have an idea what that is. So that was kind of my motivation, is to kind of put this information into people's hands and to synthesize all the information that's in these huge FIA databases, hundreds and thousands of trees
Mm-hmm.
scattered, measured. Some of them have been remeasured multiple times. So it's just a huge database and a wealth of information that's relatively untapped.
It's really exciting to see, and that's I saw when you posted on LinkedIn the Shiny app for Alabama, and I had seen one that you had did previously. Maybe it was for South
South
Carolina.
Carolina, yeah,
Yeah, and I jumped on it, and I was like, man, this is super easy to use. It's
yeah,
very straightforward. Like, click this, click that. You
yeah,
got your
yeah,
biomass right there in a table.
yeah.
What I'm curious about is, are you connecting to the FIA database, or did you have to download all the data and now that's just stored in some tables in your Shiny app?
I I downloaded the data and fit, went through and looked at the relationships
Mhm.
between DBH and the biomass components
Right.
and fit equations to the data,
Mhm.
and those are what's driving the programs.
I got you.
So
Yeah.
it has an equation for each component, for each species and each FIA unit in each state.
Hmm.
So not all the species are present in each unit, and so that was a kind of a tricky way of coming up with a default list of species in each one of the regions. So
Hmm.
that was that's a lot of programming.
Yeah, yeah. To make it dynamic where it's
Right.
conditioned on something else in a Shiny app
Right.
is so complicated.
Yeah. The other thing was setting the upper limits on the maximum diameter for each one of the species. So that was kind of a interesting uh, application of the switch statement, and it
Right.
apparently it just keeps on reading ifs conditions until it reaches one that doesn't have a condition. It's the last one is it's what it defines. So you can define multiple species in one line.
Hmm.
So I thought that was really handy.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd like to do is be able to put all that information into a database to where I can call that up and to where I can put all the statewide apps into kind of a dashboard
Mm.
where it's running off of one database, where each table would be for a state, and you select a state off of the dashboard and it goes and tells you which regions are in that state and what they're called, and shows you the map. And so everything would be done kind of dynamically, going back to the database, reading the information once you've selected the state. So that's, I guess, that's my next big project.
Yeah. Have you played around with the Shiny dashboards?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
So that's another thing.
it's a lot of fun and it'll take all of your time.
It will. Oh, great! I can't wait.
Yeah, yeah. I've been working on a little bit too, just for working on displaying inventory data. And,
Yeah.
it's my company eventually, I think they're doing something completely different than what I was playing around with.
Hmm.
They hired an actually professional programmer to
Oh,
do it,
good.
but the dashboards are so much fun.
Yeah.
And it's like what you said, like selecting your state or whatever it may be, your tree species or
Mhm.
whatever it may be, and just being able to display that information is pretty cool. The
Yeah.
problem that I have is connecting to an outside database
Mhm.
for a Shiny app on the shinyapps.io website.
Well,
So
I
if you
use
ever think,
SQLite.
huh?
SQLite
Oh yeah,
that it deploys with the Shiny app,
yeah.
and you don't have to have an external database.
Hmm.
But I guess, if you want real information, you need to do that.
Yeah. And that was what I was thinking is if you wanted to be able to connect to a database in real time. So because those databases are updated, you
Mhm.
don't want to have to be stuck in a position where you have to keep going back and re-downloading data and updating a data set. And so
Yeah.
that's the only part that I found to be complicated that
Hmm.
even though I stuck 100 hours into it, I didn't have more time to figure that piece out.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think databases, uh, learning more about databases, I believe, was a big breakthrough in terms of programming.
Hmm.
And it really makes it to where you can generate a lot of data, and you don't have to worry about storing it,
Hmm.
at least not right away.
Yeah.
In a lot of the things we do in forestry, we'll do one calculation that's based on about five or six other calculations. And so it's nice to have all these previous steps stored in a database. You can just call them up. They don't have
Hmm.
to be carried in memory the whole time.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
so that really opens a lot of avenues for programming. And so uh, I was I think when I worked at Hancock, that was when I was kind of forced to get involved with databases because they were so uh, fixed with access and
Hmm.
SQL Server, and so it kind of forced me to learn how to do it.
Hmm.
And uh, I was kind of forced forced to learn R when I went to the bosses and said I want to get SAS, and this is how much it's going to cost for the first year,
Right.
and was told learn R,
Yeah.
and uh, next thing I knew, I was given a project to learn R, and they wanted to know what the property level standard error of the mean was for every one of the properties for total volume.
Hmm.
They had a contractual obligation to meet a certain specification, property by property. And someone was asking questions about that. So I actually found a program that did a jackknife.
Oh, cool.
I found it was right there on the internet.
Yeah.
So I built everything around it, calling up from SQL Server, and so that was my first R application.
Hmm.
Uh, it was pretty challenging. But and then after that, it was like, okay, um, my objectives after that included at least one new R program every year that I had to do. So then I started making programs where we could use it to screen the data in the inventory data when it's coming in. So
Yeah. I, like you, had a SAS background because when I started, R wasn't even around. It was still S or
yeah,
S plus, whatever it was, and everyone was still using SAS. So I learned SAS for 2 years and then
mm,
went to Virginia Tech, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not paying for that." So
ah,
they picked up R.
mm,
Um, but I do enjoy the R community
yeah,
because it's like it can be a little bit nasty at times because people are
mm,
just kind of rude over the internet in general.
oh,
But if
mm,
you have a question, you
mm,
can search for that, and usually
oh,
somebody's already done it. And if you haven't done it, you can post it on one of the boards, and generally somebody can help you out within a couple hours.
yeah,
And that is just so awesome to me to have that available for everyone who wants to get into a programming language. I mean, I did not have that with SAS, but of course,
mm,
times are different now. Maybe it does exist, and I just
yeah,
was at a different time.
yeah.
But I
So
really enjoy the art community and art and forestry specifically
yeah.
because everybody's always willing to help and to share code that they can
Hmm.
share. It's been great.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that too. So it seems like there's hasn't been anything that I needed to do that I couldn't find some information related to that.
Right.
Uh, even sampling. There's a R function that will generate a random selection of a certain number of from a data frame.
Hmm.
So, or even a systematic selection.
Hmm.
So you don't have to worry about figuring out how to do that if you're writing a sampling program.
Right.
So I thought that was real handy to. Of course, I found that out a little bit too late after I'd gotten kind of far into that, and then realized, oh, I can do this instead. So, but it's amazing what's out there if you just have the interest in looking for it.
Yeah, and what's amazing is how quickly you can build on your skills. What you just mentioned is like you get to a point and you realize, oh, I could have just done this.
Yeah,
If you ever go and look at your code from a year ago or 3 years ago, and you go like, wow, why did you do that? I could write this 10 lines in one line. Like
yeah,
it's yeah.
yeah.
But I really enjoy seeing people doing our stats and doing our work, doing shiny work, and then putting stuff out for free for people to see. Because I think that really is something that's a little bit unique in our
Hmm,
field.
hmm.
I'm not saying there's not other fields that don't do it,
Yeah.
but I really find the biometrics community, especially in the US, but across
Hmm.
the world, that we're just so kind of open and we like to help each other out. And, you know, some people are just willing to do something for free just because it's fun and it's exciting and you get to share that knowledge with others.
Yeah.
And the fact that you like to do that, I think, is an amazing quality.
Well, thanks. Anyway, I just like doing it. It makes me feel um, like I have a purpose, you
Yeah.
know, being semi-retired more than just earning an income. And like I said, it's kind of a passion project for me.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it helps me to stay active. And I think, as I'm aging,
Hmm.
um, I need to do things to stay sharp. And programming is definitely something that will keep you sharp or else. And so it's been pretty enjoyable working with R and um, programming in general. And like you said, there's not much you can't find that someone hasn't already done.
Right.
And so,
So I'm curious, you went to UGA, you were doing all of your work with weed control and
mhm.
making your models, and then you went to Oregon.
Yeah, I went to Oregon State. I was when I finished up my PhD work
Mhm.
doing young stand models for the Southeast. They had a project in the Northwest where at Oregon State where they wanted a young stand model for their um, forest too, and so I went out there and basically jumped in and started doing that. Um, my idea was to make kind of a diameter distribution type model. Um, they didn't really have a whole lot of information to develop a regional model using the existing information. So we had to go out and collect some more. That was a kind of a hard thing to do, was to allocate money to go and do the field work for a couple of years. So
Mhm.
we spent about 4 years collecting data in the Coast Range and the Cascades. So it was kind of fun to get out in the woods. And uh, we always used to joke about, we of course we're out there in the winter time, so it was always precipitating. and and it was either a liquid rain or a solid rain. And so we kind of joke about how hard the rain was. About we we'd measure the heights with a height pole. You'd have to run it up and you're always your hands up to the sky with the rain falling up your raincoat sleeve. And so we'd always tell how hard it was raining by how high the water went on your sleeve
Mhm.
when you got done at the end of the day. So
Yeah, that's funny.
yeah,
My my master's advisor, Dean Coble, was telling me of his first day working out there in the northwest coast, and I'm probably going to misquote him, but it was basically the first day that he got on the job. They took him down to the ship docks to get all of his rain gear because that was
yeah.
the best rain gear for the woods.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I made the mistake of buying some not the best quality stuff, and it didn't last very long. And so you find out quick that you need to buy that heavy duty stuff that the fishermen use.
right.
Yeah, and
And of course,
anyway,
being from the south, we don't really like summer rains are like, yeah, we'll take that every single chance we
yeah,
get. It's not like it's just pouring on us every day. So it's just a really good
yeah. Well,
experience.
it wasn't pouring. It was just kind of a
Mm,
light drizzle, 24/7 for
mm,
about 8 months,
yeah.
and you just get used to it.
But you being from Alabama, going to Georgia, I mean, it must have been a big change for you to now be in the Pacific Northwest.
It was. The trees are really big out there, and people have different ways of thinking about them. And from a biometrics point of view, people were out there were used to thinking of individual tree models, probably because the trees themselves are so valuable, several $1,000s per tree. And so it makes sense that they would have an individual tree model. Um, I wanted to, I saw the work that I had done at Georgia as a way of feeding into that need and having a diameter distribution type model for the young stands that basically handed off to another model that carried them forward to rotation age where they would track the individual trees. So, uh, and it was a real challenge. It was uh, really nice to get out in the woods in a different part of the world. Um, Things are different out there. The understory is much more open than it is here for the most part. Um, and everything's wet. There's not, I wasn't concerned about poisonous snakes like I was in Florida. And I guess the biggest danger in the woods out there was yellow jackets when you'd always worry about stirring up a nest in the ground and they'd start swarming. But I never had any issues with snakes or anything like that. So, but from a professional point of view, it was a great job to have as a young PhD because I went into a situation where I had a specific project to work on, and there was a lot of supporting information through the Forest Science Data Bank that I could use to kind of make a case for what I wanted to do. And so it was great in terms of getting established. I was able to crank out a couple of publications every year, 2 or 3 publications a year while I was out there, and uh, it was just a great opportunity for me. And the project ended, and I came back south.
Yeah, and then you've been here ever since.
Yeah.
Much.
So I'm originally I was born in California, so I wasn't too far away from where I originally was. But I I moved from California when I was 3 years old. So I lived in the South all my life, except for when I was in Oregon.
And at some point, I mean, you've been most of your career in consulting, but you went to teach at University of
Yeah.
Tennessee.
Yeah. Hmm. So I was there for a couple of years. Xinghai is there.
Chingy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, what made you, I think I had a little bit of opposite. I went into academia and research, and then I came to consulting. But you went directly into kind of not really consulting, but research work. Then you went to consulting, and then you went to academia. So you decided in the middle to
Yeah.
do teaching experience.
Yeah. So I wanted to, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I'd tried some other things. And to me, at the time, having a PhD, it made sense to pursue some sort of academic
Mhm.
uh, career. And so I gave it a try, and things didn't work out. And so I'm off doing consulting now.
Yeah. I Yeah, my wife is a professor of chemistry, and she is really amazing at what she does. And I can tell you, I was made for consulting. I don't think I could have been a professor and have. There's just so much of the other stuff that you have to deal with, which for me is not as much fun. It is the grading. It is the keeping up with everyone and making sure nobody's falling
Mm,
behind. It's just
mm,
I have enough trouble getting my shoes on in the morning myself to
mm.
make sure other people are doing what they need to
Yeah,
do.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah, there's a long list of clients, I guess, customers, so to speak, in academia, and you have to please all of them.
yeah,
So yeah, it's a tough job. I don't think
right.
everyone's cut out for it. I guess I wasn't.
I don't know how much longer after that you started your consulting business and
Yeah.
doing great.
Well, I'm still in business.
Good.
That's to me, that's the best definition of sustainability is how long can you stay in business?
Right, right. You're the inspiration for everyone that wants to,
Oh
leave
well,
it
I hope
alone.
so.
Yeah,
It's hard. It's hard, but it's rewarding. And I guess the most rewarding part about it is being able to have a more opportunities to pick and choose what you want to work on.
right.
And I think that's the best part of it is picking and choosing.
Yeah. I guess probably the aspect of any job is the monotony that can really kind of to dig at you. Again, with the teaching, you hear people say they, got their lectures together 20 years ago, and then they never changed them since. And to
Mm.
me, to be able to go in and just regurgitate the same information over and over is just not something that I would have found to be
Yeah,
particularly rewarding or fun. But for those that love to do it,
yeah,
great for you. We
yeah,
need you. We need educators. I'm just saying, it's personally wasn't for me.
yeah, yeah. I gave it a try. Um, I guess I wasn't that good at it, and so went to something else, back to something else that I felt like I was good at. So I
Yeah.
tried. I found out that I sucked at something. I was brave enough to try and found out that I really sucked. So I'm not teaching anymore. I
That
think my
happens.
students would probably agree.
Well, and again, it's exciting to see what you're doing, and we're very happy to have you there. My last question for you is: are you going to the Southern Mensurationist meeting?
Regretfully, no.
Yeah.
I had originally planned on going, and I was going to give a talk about the sampling project that I did with Rainier, where I looked at the substands, trying to improve the accuracy and precision by subdividing stands and looking for areas that were different, small areas within a large area that were different.
Hmm.
And but I have a conflicting schedule on, and I couldn't leave. I would basically miss all day Monday
Hmm.
and at least half of the meeting, and I couldn't justify going for uh, just a half a day.
Right.
So I would have liked to have gone to give a presentation and had most of it put together, and it just I have other obligations, so can't get out of them.
Yeah. Well, we're going to miss you. It's going to be a great meeting. We're happy to have these in person again.
Yeah,
He is hosting. He's already putting together a wonderful conference, and there's a lot of talk around it, and it's really exciting to get back to
yeah,
these things in person and to see people again.
yeah. That's true. Yeah.
We've been doing Zoom calls and talking like this, and this is
Mm,
great. But there's something about sitting around, having a beer, and talking
right.
about old stuff that just brings up the idea machine and gets things moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is nothing like getting together in person. So really
Yeah.
wish I could go, but maybe next time.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for coming. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next time.
thanks for having me.